All right, everyone. Thank you for logging in and joining us and coming to this live in this this questions and answers with Anna. Don't worry, we got plenty of questions lined up tonight and all the technical details taken care of. Anna is running a few minutes late, but should be here any minute. So I just leave you to ponder till she arrives. Are you there, Anna? You're muted. Check your mic. All right, I'm calling you. We'll talk through it. We'll get you there. You can hear me, right, Anna? Let me turn this off. All right. Give them your updates, and I'm going to drive home while you're updating, okay?
All right. Okay, folks. Sorry, we're off to a rocky start. We've put in some new equipment, new programming, and it's just not wanting to work the way we would like it to work. Maybe we have a bandwidth problem. But anyway, we're trying to get all of these different aspects sorted out so that you'll have a better experience in days to come, right? Sort of our watchword.
That's our theory.
That's the theory. I guess the big news is that we have successfully altered the timeline. And for those of you who are wondering what that might mean, it's really just that given any set of probabilities, any set of parameters, we have a greater or lesser likelihood of a whole range of different things happening, all the way down to the scale of individual bugs living or dying, okay? And that range of probabilities has locked down successfully in a pathway forward that leads to life and not death for the entire planet, which has been a considerable upset for those that are involved in this death cult that we are facing in our midst. And I want to point out to those of you who are biblical or rabbinical scholars that the book of Enoch, which was written centuries before the time of Yeshua, foretold this exact situation, and also foretold that there would be those that were born from the line of Noah who, one way or another, ran true to the root, meaning the very beginning. And those individuals would be people that could not be deceived. Now, maybe I should say could not be easily deceived. But people that ultimately would not be deceived, even though the entire world falls into deception. And what do we now see? We see an entire world that has fallen into the deception of corporations and legal fiction entities having substance and meaning when actually they're just fictions. Okay? And we've been using debt notes, IOUs, as a currency. I guess one way to look at that is that you could have done this at any time with any currency. You could have created a currency that was credit notes. You didn't have to use debt notes. You could have used credit notes. And it would have worked out better, but that would not have allowed for usury. And so now we have in tandem monetary and financial systems, one that deals with actual assets, gold and silver coinage, and certificates representing actual gold and silver held in vaults. And then you have the entire system of credit and debit, which is what we call the financial system as opposed to the monetary system. And together they make up an economic system that the entire world depends upon. Now, there are assets, and then there is the debt or the credit, the operational debt, or the credit accrued from the productivity or value of the commodity. Okay? So what we've done is to do the bookkeeping. We've basically evaluated the processes in the financial system, and we have evaluated the physical assets, and we have, in the process of evaluating the processes, discovered that the living people have been parasitized by corporations, and that great imbalances have resulted in both the monetary system and the financial system, the debt credit system, because of basically improper bookkeeping, misrepresentations, fraud, false claims in commerce, failure to self-regulate or regulate in the case of the quote-unquote trustees who have self-appointed themselves in many cases. And what you wind up with is a gigantic criminal mess. And I've always referred to it as a mess. So the whole process has ground forward to the point now where the criminal nature of the mess has to be more broadly recognized, and those responsible for it have to be recognized, not only because ultimately they're the ones responsible for it, but because in the end they're the ones accountable for it. And the sad and ugly truth of it is that most of them didn't even realize what they were doing. So, although it is tempting to say ignorance of the law is no excuse, we have millions of people who have participated in this. Many of them have actually benefited themselves from doing this, and yet they haven't really known that they were participating in armed robbery, privateering, mercenary, wartime, mercenary conflict time activities. They just haven't known. So, what to do? This is a situation where it pleads for mercy. So what we have here is a cycle, if you will. And it's a historical cycle. It's like a cycle of the seasons or cycle of time that is predictable, that runs forward and then loops back. And in terms of the feminine aspect of this generative cycle, you start out with the foundation, which is represented by Sarah in the Bible, she who laughs, and then it progresses through to Grace, the grandmother of Yeshua, and then it proceeds to Mary, she who weeps. And this great cycle, which is revealed in a sort of coded or represented way by names and by personages, is really a cycle of frequencies or emotional conditions that are found upon the earth. And so we have passed through the portion of this cycle where Mary wept, right? The loss, the death, right? A terrible loss, a terrible death. And now the cycle has returned back through Grace and is headed toward what? Sarah, she who laughs, the rebirth, the miracle birth, the unexpected birth, the continuance of what was shut off, that was impossible.
Can you hear me now, boss?
I can.
Okay, because I made it home, obviously.
You did. Well, thank you very much for coming up with a midterm solution here.
All right, finish up your thing and let me know when we're ready to rock and roll.
I will flag you down. So anyway, all of these cycles have to do with time, and the money and the credit cycle also has to do with this eternal cycle. And that's why I mentioned that the keyholes at the Vatican are misaligned. And this is just one of the ways in which we can locate where we're at and where we should be and what's messed up. And I also observed to you that it's been more than 800 years since the world saw a jubilee, which is mandated by the scriptural interpretation of this great cycle. And that then is what has given rise to the mess. Now, I know this is probably going over a lot of heads right now, but this is something that has been known to those who study scripture, especially those who are into the mystical Kabbalah and the tree of life symbols and the mirrored energies of the universe and the flow of time, which, as it turns out, is very important for us in this particular world, okay, this particular reality that we live in. And when we're talking about all this in terms of timelines, we have basically 6 cubes. Try to imagine cubes. You know, they have 6 sides. There's a top, there's a bottom, and 4 sides to a cube, right? And we have 3 dimensions. So we have 6 cubes. And however those cubes sort out and tumble, and which sides come up, results in a timeline. So you've got 6 times 6 times 6. Right? 6, 6, 6 permutations. And these each one of these different permutations result in a timeline that leads to life or to death. The death cult is constantly trying to manipulate things to result in universal death. And for lack of a better word for it, the life cult, those of us that value life, are equally supposed to be striving to preserve life, according to this ancient Babylonian interpretation of the duality of existence. And this is a belief in the idea that nothing can ever be absolute. Nothing can ever be wholly good or wholly bad. Everything is, as they say, relative. And this is a standpoint, philosophical and religious standpoint, that has a corrosive effect on morality, human values, cultural traditions, and most of all, religious beliefs. Now, all of this is coming to a head. And they have been so destabilized by the fact that we've been able to turn the timeline to a life-oriented lifeline, to a a timeline in which life can flourish and be abundant, and the planet can be cleaned up, and we can actually usher in that true golden age and recoup 800 years worth of jubilees which were withheld. Let's say that they're stunned. Let's say that they're nonplussed. They don't know how we did it. They don't know what kind of power we have. They sense that the end of the death cult has come finally at last, and that despite all of our failures, despite being asleep, despite being gullible, despite being ignorant, in spite of all the handicaps that we were given, we still won. And in response, they've been throwing an absolute hissy fit. It can only be described as a hissy fit because, honest to God, full-grown men crying and weeping and, oh, it's such a terrible thing. We don't get to blow up the world. It's really ridiculous. But anyway, they are having their little hissy fit. And they're throwing everything they can at us, everything they can possibly muster. And one of the things that they have mustered in their defense, you see, they think we're coming for them. They think that we are going to have to take a physical means to destroy them. They think that we're going to have to hang them in the streets and, things of that nature. They think that they are fully expecting to be eradicated physically. And they also expect to be eradicated intellectually and energetically, in energy terms. So here they are, terrified, feeling like they're caught between a rock and a hard place and getting mashed in between, right? And this is an illusion too. This is also a misapprehension, a mistaken idea of reality, a deception. And so they are reacting like a cornered mad dog in a corner, just viciously snapping and biting and trying to do anything that they possibly can to avoid the judgment that they feel is imminent. And so this past week, we've seen a launching of all of the, let's call them dark powers. They've been summoning demons using the Enochian calls. They have been summoning thought forms through their own efforts. They have been pulling various levitation tricks. They have been casting fire down on the earth. Many of you have seen that there's been a loss of many acres of land and lots of destruction to fire due to fires. And also there's been a tremendous shift in how water whether water is accessible or not. And part of this has been they've been blowing up these tunnel systems and opening up new ways for water to leak into the subterranean aquifers, so that you're seeing all sorts of bizarre things with water disappearing. You're seeing, the Euphrates River is drying up. The Mississippi River is drying up. The Colorado River is dried up to a point where it's hardly a river anymore. The aquifers that have been, the surface water aquifers, I should say, at Lake Powell, Lake Mead, and many other lakes in the western states have been severely depressed and are now the surface water is being basically siphoned off into underground tunnel structures and aquifers that have not been replenished in millions of years. Okay, so you're seeing a lot of disappearance of water, and this is going to affect the atmosphere. And they're doing this out of revenge, out of a nihilistic desire to kill life on the planet, the surface of the planet off. And this was what they did in creating the Sahara Desert, the Gobi Desert. They used different technologies, but it had the same result. And so each time that they are going to war against us, they wind up causing more destruction to the environment. So be aware that they are throwing demons, which are just coagulations of bad energy and bad intention and, mental, emotional coagulations of semi-manifested energies, basically what it is. And so you may be feeling oppressed, or you may feel like something is watching you, or you may feel that your energy is kind of frittering away and you can't really concentrate and keep solid on doing your work. Or you may find yourself being strangely peaceful, and you don't really know why, but all of a sudden it's just like peace comes over you and everything is very calm, and instead of being obsessed or worried about anything, you just are in a state of grace where you know that everything is going to turn out all right, and it's fine, even if it's weird. You are able to relax and sleep deeply and take a little break from the kind of frantic work that you've had set before you prior to this. And all of this is a result of huge energy shifts, huge changes in the mental comprehension of the people around you throughout the world. What I have called the Great Fraud has finally been fully recognized and discovered. So, hundreds of millions of people worldwide are now waking up and going, oh, and as they do this, you're seeing the results. You're going to be feeling the results. It can't be any other way. So if you've been having really weird kinds of fluctuations in your mental and emotional state, if you find yourself suddenly recalling things that you have in a dim portion of your memory somewhere, or you find yourself having odd out-of-body experiences as if you're suddenly drifting over your hometown looking down at it, or you're having suddenly you don't want to eat, all of a sudden you have no appetite, suddenly you have kind of a weird skin prickly feeling as if there's something in the room with you, but there's nothing there. These are all sorts of signs and symptoms of both all of the black magic that's being hurled around the world right now and all of the energetic changes that are happening. And I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to just realize that, okay, we're going through this kind of bumpity bump process, but the end result is good. The end result is that, yes, we're going to get where we needed to go. We're going to clean up the environment. We are going to receive back our assets. We are going to go forward from here. We're going to be able to live. Our planet is going to live. We're all going to get through this together. And so I want you to, if anything, take hold of those moments of peace that just come out of nowhere and suddenly settle on you like, ah. Take advantage of those. Rest in those. Be grateful for those. Because what that portends is a balancing out of this sort of warfare that's going on all around you in the ethersphere, as they say. And at the end of the day, the thing that is important is truth. Because the goal is peace, but the precondition for peace is truth. And I just want to take a minute here and explain that, because if you're believing things that aren't true and you're acting upon things that aren't true, then you are creating a system or a situation which is out of balance with nature. And you can skew that just so far before you start destroying yourself and your environment. So there is a limit. And we've reached it. And now comes the pendulum swing that has to happen to bring our level of mental and emotional and energetic development back in line with our technological and our, well, for lack of a better word, the matrix environment of the world that is so useful in creating supply lines so that we can trade for rice from Southeast Asia for, beef from the Midwest. So there are aspects of all of this that have to be balanced out. The actual creditors have to be recognized. Nobody wants to play the debtor, right? Everybody wants to be the creditor. Nobody wants to be the debtor. They're so afraid of the debt. Oh, no, no, no. But this is because they don't recognize the truth. The truth is that debt does not exist. It simply doesn't exist. It cannot exist. And once people understand that, then the fear of debt and the impetus to collect false debts for profit and everything that is aligned with this system of chicanery goes out the window. Because people wake up one morning and they go, blink, blink, I don't owe any debts. Come to think of it, my great-grandfather didn't owe any debts. So who or what owes all these debts? And what do the books actually say? What is the accounting? And when you do the accounting, you find out that debt does not exist for anybody. Now, isn't that a nice thing to think? But it's also true. It's verifiable, provable, and I've proven it. So there is no debt. And in fact, there are no incorporated entities. They're just groups of people together trying to do something. There are no corporations. And there are only relationships between people. So what I want to talk about this afternoon, besides kind of giving you a heads up and hand-holding regarding all the energetic vibes and all the craziness going on energetically, is that among the relationships that people have are natural trusts. And what do I mean by a natural trust? That's where you turn to your best friend and you say, you know, I have to go on this long journey and it's a dangerous path and I may not make it back on time. I may not make it back at all. So I'm going to entrust my home and my wealth and my young son to your care in my absence. Okay, that's a natural trust. And so you turn over your affairs and your son to your best friend and you ride off over the horizon there. And then everybody waits. Nobody knows what's going to happen. 7 years comes and goes, and you're presumed dead. And your best friend is now a trustee still, but operating as if you were dead. So now your trust becomes an estate, a testamentary estate, okay? And this is the condition in which we have all found ourselves, even though we did not make a trust with and did not name these trustees, okay? But this is the basic format of how this got generated, is from natural trusts. And those are also called commonwealth trusts, or not commonwealth, common law trusts, I'm sorry. So these are natural common law trusts that arise out of us entrusting someone to do something for us. And it could be almost anything. It could have stipulations attached to it. For example, I give my best friend $100 and I say, hold this for me until I get back from my my job. You know, when I'm finished with my job, I'll come back and get that $100 from you. Okay, so you hand the $100 to your friend and they hold it until you get back from your job. Okay, if it takes 10 hours to get done with your job, fine. If it takes 2 weeks to get done with your job, fine too. The stipulation is that to give me back my $100 when I'm done with my job. All right, so that's another kind of non-statutory common law trust. You can have stipulations attached to a trust that triggers the trust to come into being. And I also want you to notice something else about such common law trusts. In the first case, where you are giving your estate and your money and your young son to your best friend to act as guardian and trustee and take care of your son using your estate, right? You have a donor, you have a trustee, and you have a beneficiary. And each of these are 3 different people, right? 1, 2, 3. But in the second example, it's just you and your best friend and the content of the trust, the asset of the trust. Okay, so what you've got there is a donor and a trustee, and the beneficiary on the other side is the donor. So that also works too. All right, this is all natural common law trust situations that arise in the course of just living our lives on this planet. And over time, we learned to write these relationships down. And when we do so, it becomes a written trust indenture. So what does that mean? Why the word indenture? Well, it means that the trustee is indentured. They're in a period of service doing a duty, right? They have a job to do. And usually the trust indenture will stipulate some sort of reward to the trustee for doing the work. Sometimes it's implied because the trustee is gifted with assets of the estate. Sometimes it is awarded directly as a stipulation of my trustee gets £1,500 a month for his duties related to this trust, And sometimes there's a stipulation that the trustee is acting from the goodness of his heart, out of his love for you as his friend. He's doing this extra job for you. Okay? This is all common law trust activity. Now, where things started to get a little bit strange, a little bit different, where there was no longer a trustee who was your best friend or your mother or your cousin Alf, was when the church became involved as a trustee. And this happened also. And this is a situation that developed during the Crusades, where not only would you have a friend who was basically acting as your trustee, but you would name the church in the event that the friend died or was missing or unable. And you can see how this would happen because at that time it was understood that the church was a body of believers, and you knew those believers and they knew you, and you were bound in Christian love to take care of each other. And so it became a practice in the Middle Ages, and especially the Dark Ages, for the church to be named as sort of a secondary trustee in the event that your best friend died. So whoever remained of your church, your local church, would become the trustee. The trustees, the community, would become the trustees of your minor children. They would become the trustees of your estate until he reached maturity. And in a point of fact, the priest became, one of the central comptrollers of this arrangement, so that when the church was invoked as a trustee, a further trustee, kind of a fallback, there was the idea behind this being a security measure. Because remember, all of this is becoming solidified and written down and institutionalized during the Dark Ages into the Middle Ages, at a time when people were facing things like the Black Plague and the Crusades and all these things that resulted in mass death. So it was very unstable times, and they sought institutional trustees that could take over and raise children and administer estates in the absence of those that could be dead, or, who knows. So institutionalized trustees became more familiar and were viewed as a good thing, because even if 30% of the people died, it was at least hoped that a church would continue and that there would be enough people in the church to responsibly administer all these assets which were left behind. Okay? So that's how the church got its nose in the tent. And that's how institutionalized trusteeship started. And we've kind of gone full circle and seen how that then morphed into other mischief on the part of institutions controlling assets belonging to actual people. And the creme de la creme of that came in 1666, not 666, but 1666, with the Sestakay Act in Britain, following the Great Fire of London, which again was this catastrophic event with lots of mass death and lots of missing people, lots of people that were burned to death and incinerated and basically cremated on the spot. And afterward, nobody knows where they are. They don't know if they escaped in a wagon going north. And so the London was left with a citywide dilemma of not only all the death and all the destruction and having to clean up the huge mess from the Great Fire, but also ultimately who owns what's left. Okay, so this is how we get the Sestakay Act and how we get the government, specifically city government, with its nose in the tent also. So now we've got the church and we've got the city government taking hold of abandoned assets or assets belonging to unknown persons, all right? And you can see how this is developing from a simple, relatively simple, natural sort of contracting process into an increasingly complex process in which you have the possibility of institutional players getting a toehold and a hook into private assets. And both the church and the government at the city level have always since been engaged in exactly that. And they don't really need a big excuse to create that beneficial position for themselves. It could be any kind of natural disaster. It could be anything that caused mass death. Well, guess what? We've had 2 world wars that caused mass death and mass destruction and mass distribution of assets and distribution of possible errors. The First and Second World Wars resulted in such things as British peers living in Burma. In fact, the last of the Plantagenets and the most senior Lord High Steward both live offshore in Australia. Okay, so at the end of the First and the Second World Wars, there was this gaping situation of who owns what and where are the heirs and how can we decide who owns this piece of property, and the laws of paternity and inheritance and who's defined as progeny and all of that got very messed up, and both the church and the governments got their hooks into things and kept nibbling away at private property interests using trusts as a means to do this. And it devolved to the point where between the 2 world wars, we had this whole registration process in which these foreign persons were created and attached to the living people in every country that was affected, which is now at least 60 of the so-called industrialized countries of the world, in which, both the government and the church got their hooks into private estates using a registration process. So they just sort of grew out of the Middle Ages and the Cestui Act and the Great Fire of London into a war profiteering model that then also let the church and the state get into everybody's private assets and to claim to have a beneficial interest in everybody's private assets and to charge administrative fees for managing all these private assets and to also benefit themselves in other ways. And this is the essence of the mess that we have right now, is the abuse of trusts. Well, finally, it didn't take too long when England was again overcome by debt in the early, well, it was the English Civil War caused the crisis, okay? And the triumphant Roundheads under Oliver Cromwell absolutely destroyed the monarchy. Not only did they kill the king outright and behead him, Charles II, they also destroyed the office of the King of England on land. I mean, they didn't just take Charles II out of that office. They obliterated the office. And so when they started over with William of Orange, a Dutch prince coming over, it was as a territorial monarchy. It was as a business taking over as a creditor of England. So England lost control of its land jurisdiction and began operating entirely on the sea and in the air circa 1702 under Queen Anne, all right? And so they're basically limping along on just two jurisdictions. And so who becomes their trustee on the land? Well, obviously, William of Orange became the trustee, but who was he operating for? The Pope, the church. Once again, the institutional trustee comes in and takes control of the land jurisdiction that is actually owed not to any particular king, but to the English people. Now, the consequences of this have played out over the last 300 years. And the worst consequence has been the proliferation of mercantile war, or what we call mercenary conflict. And this is because in the process of all of these upheavals and all of these debts that were accrued by governments and then had to be dispersed somehow, they started taking the debts of the government and transferring it on to the people who lived in a country. And that is how everybody has gradually gotten snafu'd into this whole system of either being part of their personnel and being an indentured servant, a trustee, right, under a trust indenture, or being a slave, a bonded servant. And once you know this history and you have it into a wide view of it, then you can see how trusts have been used to defraud, and how the assumption of a trustee relationship or a trustee position with regard to assets by institutions has been used to then control the assets of living people, and living people have been conveniently redefined as persons, all to promote this control and defraud scheme. And my son observed this afternoon that this is just a reprise of the Roman Empire, because the Romans made their money by exactly the same means, by the gradual bonding and enslavement, by indenture and by slavery of conquered peoples. And they even had an entire law system that was set up to do this, which we recognize now as Roman civil law or maritime law, and which they have bastardized into a more modern form as equity law. And all of this was done by Scotsmen. So, once again, Scotland and Rome are actually at the bottom of the dog pile. And I just more generally say Brits. But if you really want to get to the heart of the matter, the criminal aspects of this and the process my son noted, which is to redefine and measure and regulate and control. Well, you could call it modify, or I call it redefine, but modify, measure, regulate, and control. This is something that the Romans perfected, and that the Scots have just embroidered upon and used the situation in England as a means to manipulate the use of Roman civil law in maritime jurisdiction. And this gigantic fraud has developed from there over the past 300 years. And everybody who's hearing me tonight has an option here. If you don't believe me, read, look. It's right there in front of us. It hasn't been hidden. It's been on display. It simply hasn't been taught to us. Just like the use of public trusts versus private trusts hasn't been taught to us. Just like the nature of a common law trust versus a statutory trust has not been made clear to us. And the reason why is that the people that were benefiting most from this system, government officials, bureaucrats, and the business interests that were getting large amounts of money directed to them by the government that was benefiting itself, has created its own little world, quite apart from the living people that it parasitizes. And if you get our little book, You Know Something is Wrong When, you will see that one of the pages there describes exactly the situation that we've fallen into, where the business interests support the government pays for the military, and the military supports the business interests, and then the business interest supports the government, which supports the military interests, which supports the government. And you've got this nice little closed circle in which the voters and electors and the actual owners of all the assets that they've quote unquote put in trust for you don't have to pay any attention to the people, because the purse strings are now in the hands of those that should be paid by us. And instead, they're paying themselves out of our pockets and out of our assets. And they're making the determination about how much is spent on what. Okay? So I'm just sort of laying out the big picture here for you tonight so that you're kind of intellectually and emotionally prepared for the kind of buffeting, and you have a basic idea of how all of this developed over time. And I want to kind of leave you with that information. I want you to think about it. I want you to realize that this crept up on us very gradually over a long period of time through multiple administrations of different presidential administrations, and that it finally just got as bad as it is because nobody realized that the bookkeeping was off and the time was off. And so once we did the time and we did the bookkeeping, it all becomes very clear that the living people are the creditors, and all these businesses, all these corporations, all these governments, and the church are the debtors. Okay, Shannon, are you ready to take it away?
Ready and waiting, boss lady. All right. Hi, can you explain how the Digital UK Electronic Travelling Authorization, ETA, affects ASNs? But also, what does this do to non-ASN Americans who may want to correct their status in the near future, since they won't listen to reason today but still want to go to North Ireland while visiting Dublin?
Well, bear in mind that all of these rules and regulations are established by and for government employees. So if you're not a government employee or dependent, if you're not getting a check from the government, then they don't really apply to you. And it's up to you to bring the complaint, and bring the complaint to the Vatican Chancery Court, bring the complaint to the UN, to the International Court of Justice, and bring it in behalf of your own government. Because you are the government. There is no other. We're going through the same thing here.
Oh.
I just wanted...
Go ahead, boss.
I just wanted to bring up that U.S. Supreme Court decision because it's such a rank example of what my son was describing. The modification and then the measurement and then the process of regulating and then controlling, coercing, and profiting from the regulation. This is what they're doing. And we had another example of that regarding property taxes, where the U.S. Supreme Court came out and said, yes, all homeowners must pay property taxes down to the penny, right? Or their homes and lands can be seized. Well, this is because homeowners are British subjects, or they're municipal subjects, one of the two, and their land is by definition held in public trusts. And so they don't have an interest, they don't have a valid interest in any land per se in this country, nor do they have any valid interest in the buildings and houses in this country. Okay, so I have a house and land. They have a home and property. Different language for the same thing. They modified the meaning of something and switched out a bait and switch. A house becomes a home. Land becomes property. See? It's black magic. It's a spell, a deception, a illusion. People assume that they have a home when in fact what they have is a house. That's what they own. Living people have a house. Living people have land. Persons, corporations, estate trusts, public or private. That is a home and a property interest. You see how devious and how they've modified and redefined and used terms of art and left you in the dark so that you can't even stand up and defend yourself and say, no, I'm talking about my house. I'm not talking about any homeowner. There is no homeowner interest in this particular piece of land. You see? This is how they do it. Modify the terms, modify the meanings, modify, make one thing appear to be another. It's black magic. It's a spell. It's a spell work. So is the money. It's all, an illusion. It's all based on black magic. Okay, so Shannon, go ahead.
Okay, for our next question, how do we handle contracts we're already in, like a vehicle?
Well, there's a lot of different discussion right now about all of that. They've basically fooled you into giving up your interest in your own car or truck and they've also claimed control over you and your business operations by getting you to register it as a commercial vehicle. They just drop the word commercial and they don't explain what a vehicle is. And so you going along are told that you have to register your car or your truck, and you go along and you do so, and you give up your ownership interest in your car or truck. And the state of Alaska or the state of Nebraska or whatever comes along and claims that interest for the public trust that they administer. Isn't that sweet of them? They latch right onto your property and leave you to pay off the car loan, even though they are actually the owner of the interest. They're actually claiming to be the owner of your car and the license plate that they gave you in token of their ownership interest in your car, because you have converted it into a commercial vehicle owned by the state. And you've also subjected yourself to the role of being a commercial driver, an individual engaged in interstate commerce, and therefore you are now accountable to this incredible debt load of statutory infractions and requirements and insurances and speed limits, and oh my God, your tail light isn't functioning. You see, they entrap you. And what they use to maintain their control are all of these regulations that they've set up around their redefinition of your car or truck as a vehicle, a commercial vehicle, right? So now you are subject to all of their rules and regulations concerning interstate trade and the use of quote unquote federal highways. Isn't it nice how they've done things to suit themselves and to benefit themselves and give themselves coercive power and to steal an interest in your actual possessions, things that you work for, things that you actually pay for? And now perhaps you begin to understand why when I sit here and I look at you and I have this kind of demeanor of grace, right? I'm not angry. You can tell I don't have an iota, not a pinhead's worth of anger in me. And why is that? It's because the anger hit long ago. I had my angry period. And now what's left is a stone cold, hard determination to bring an end to this system.
Okay, next question. Is it true that Trump is getting rid of the bar?
Well, which bar? Because there are multiple bars out there. There's the International Bar Association, there's the American Bar Association, there's the Colorado State Bar, there's the State of Colorado Bar Association. Just exactly which one of these vermin are you getting rid of? Are you getting rid of the rats, the shrews, the squirrels, or the mice?
Okay, we got an update on that question to zone it in a little more for you. Trump claims he's stripping the ABA's accreditation. Could you explain what that means, especially for people who are seeking a degree in paralegal studies or criminal justice?
That means that a man functioning as the president of a British Crown corporation doing business as the United States of America Incorporated, British, 100% British, is attacking the American Bar Association under the misbegotten idea that the American Bar Association is standing in the way of Britain having its total, complete sway over everything. But in fact, all of the bar associations have their locus in Britain. All of them are being run by the inner city of London. All of them are members of the Temple Bar and the Inns of Court. And all of them are as British as can be. All of them are esquires. It doesn't matter if you call yourself the American Bar Association, the International Bar Association, the Colorado State Bar, it's totally stupid is what it is. And he's barking up the wrong tree on top of it, because the American Bar Association is the organization that betrayed our country to Britain more than any other. And if he's after communists, it's the International Bar Association he wants to go after, but he doesn't know enough to know that. Or he doesn't want to go after communists. That's the other aspect. You see, you don't know if they're acting in ignorance or they're acting in guile. It's awfully hard to tell, the truth about someone's intent. But you look at what they say and then you look at what they do, and what they do is often 180 degrees opposite to what they should be doing if what's coming out of their mouth over here actually was to pay off in traction, actually doing something about it over here. And this is, again, one of those situations. It's not the American Bar Association that is as much the problem as it's all bar associations, and they all come from England. And therefore, the real problem is with the inner city of London, the Temple Bar, and the Inns of Court. It's the British system, the British legal system is the problem in sum total. This is what they've used as a means to defraud and embezzle and siphon and control. And they've used this means and Roman civil law as the fundamental pièce de résistance to do all of this. You should look at members of the Bar Association the same way that you would look at mercenaries. The same exact way you would look at armed mercenaries. And they're just, they play for different corporate interests, but they all play for corporate interests. And they all play against the people. So, if Trump thinks he's going to do something grand by getting rid of the American Bar Association, what's going to happen is that those same members, assuming they're allowed to live, will just flip around and they'll become members of the International Bar, or they'll become members of the British accredited bar, or they'll become members of the state bar, or I just look at that and I think, well, not only are the rats beginning to desert the sinking ship, the rats are beginning to bite each other. The rats are beginning to swarm and get into their ratly fights. So obviously the people that Trump works for want to find a scapegoat, and so they are going against their own brethren who happen to be American Bar Association members as opposed to international or state-of-state Bar Association members. And so you've got a situation developing there where the rats are going to be eating the mice, or the mice are going to be eating the rats, or it's one of those situations where you wish you could just walk up to President Trump and go whap right across his big fat cheek and say, no, brother, that's not the way. The way is to get rid of the bar, period, get rid of Roman civil law on our shores, and go back to maintaining where it should be in port cities where it has some sane reason to be. You see, all of this law that we've got slopping all over our country is admiralty and maritime law, and they've created a bastardized version that they call equity law, which combines sea law and land law. And they're using this in this country when what we owe ourselves is common law. Our own common law, not theirs, ours. And this is what happened in the 1750s when Lord Mansfield came in from Scotland. No, you think I don't know. I'm not lying to you. Scotland is if Britain is the shoe or the underlayment of every dog pile that we've had in the last 300 years, underneath Britain is Scotland. It was a Scottish barrister who became Lord Mansfield, who brought British admiralty and maritime law and married it to British common law to produce the bastardized version we now call equity law. And under equity law, all equity belongs to the king, and all spoils are subject to commission. salvage fees to the lawyers, the attorneys. This is part of why our forefathers fought the American Revolution, because they realized exactly what this bastardized law developed by Lord Mansfield, the Scottish barrister, would do and has done, not only to us, but to 59 other known countries. Isn't that sweet? So now you know. People, they spend their lives arguing over the pros and cons of maritime law, aka Roman civil law, versus, admiralty law versus quote unquote equity law. I hate to tell you this, but they've all kind of mishy-mashied together until you've got a soup. When I was a girl in college, I had a really interesting Sunday afternoon. This was happening at Bridgman's ice cream shop. I don't know if anyone remembers anymore. They used to have their famous 31 flavors, and the Lollapalooza was this gigantic, big trifle dish type glass mug thing in which they would put 31 scoops of ice cream. And if you could eat them all, you not only got it for free, okay, but you got like a certificate and blah, blah, okay. So the captain of the St. Olaf football team and I squared off. I had a Lollapalooza in front of me, 5'2" nothing, right? And here's the honking captain of the St. Olaf football team. I don't even remember what his name was at this point, 50 years later. But I do remember that my entire strategy was to eat it as fast as humanly possible, because I knew that the moment that this started to mash together and all of those flavors got combined, you would have something that was so sweet and so goopy and so absolutely horrible that nobody would ever be able to finish it. Success depended on being able to eat each one of those scoops as a scoop. Okay? And as far as I know, I am the only person who ever finished a Lollapalooza in that entire town forever, or that state. Okay? And it was simply because I ate it so fast. I mean, it was just, there goes a scoop. There goes a scoop. There goes a scoop, right? The captain of the football team was left with about 4 inches of amalgamated goo. Chocolate, pistachio, strawberry, raspberry, cheesecake, whatever. And of course, it was horrible. He could not eat it. And this is what's happened to law in this world. It has been mishmashed together in such a way that all it serves is injustice. And it's inedible. It's gotten to the melting stage where none of it makes sense. None of it actually serves any cause of justice. All of it's just merely about collecting non-existent debts and enslaving and entrapping and indenturing people against their will. And I lay that at Scotland's feet.
Okay, ready for the next one?
Yeah.
To be clear, I'm not asking for story details of any kind, just asking for an expanded definition of due process standards.
Due process is a concept rooted in the common law that says a person is innocent until proven guilty, and there is a process that you have to establish such things as probable cause, evidence. Is this a credible, plausible, believable claim that someone did something that resulted in injury to someone else or their property? And that process occurs also in commercial law and contract law, where there is a specific process by which you give your debtor notice of the debt and give them a time to reply to either pay it back or sue for some other renegotiation of the contract or whatever, okay? So you've got due process in different venues of law, and it does depend on which venue you're in and which jurisdiction you're in, what that due process is. But it always refers, in common law, in commercial law, in admiralty law, in any kind of law, to the process by which someone is accused and is then brought to trial. And the trial itself is the end of the due process where you have a final finding of the jury and a final sentencing by the judge. Okay? So when you have a situation in which someone is being gossiped about, gossip does not require evidence. Gossip does not require any notification. Gossip does not require any deliberation by a grand jury. It does not have notice periods. It does not allow for replies. It's just it's an evil which I have often railed against, by which a person sets themselves up as judge, jury, and executioner, and slanders and slays the person's reputation, whether or not there's any evidence, whether or not there's any deliberation, whether or not they're given any opportunity to defend themselves, whether or not they have any process by which to reply to these accusations. So gossip is kind of the ultimate, and it's the opposite. Gossip is the opposite of due process. Let's put it that way. And so when you're thinking about due process and the law, first of all, somebody has to come up with a plausible charge, a complaint of some kind, or a expense of some kind, and bring that forward with whatever proof they have. And it has to hang together. It has to make sense. It can't be something arbitrary. It can't be something that's simply a supposition or a theory without evidence, without something to back it up that's, real and tangible. And so that is the concept of due process in whatever form of law you find it.
Okay, boss, we've got about a minute and a half, so why don't we call it? First things first, I'm going to teach you how to turn off the headphones. Reach up with your right hand. You'll feel 3 buttons on that black strip. Hold down the middle one until you hear it shut down.
All right, guys. We are in the midst of very turbulent times. There's a lot of black magic spell work going on all over the world. There's a lot of very turbulent energy. Try to step out and away from that and hold your own peace. Keep your faith and keep the peace and just let it all roll on over the top. Try not to be overly affected by all of this, okay? This is taking place in realms that most of you would never be able to endure or want to be involved in. So keeping a low profile and just keeping your inner peace and keeping your eyes on what you want, the kind of world you want to see, That's the important thing that you can do right now. And also pray for protection. You know, just ask, Father, fight for us and defend us according to your word. Because in this particular situation, in this particular fight, God himself has promised to fight for us. Okay, guys. Have a blessed
See you
week
in the
ahead.
morning, boss.
Yes, Shannon, we'll see you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.